Hello, everyone, and welcome. It is an honor and an absolute pleasure to be connecting transcontinentally today with an extraordinary director of the European Forum for Restorative Justice. That's Edith Torzs, excuse me. And I'm Molly Rowan Leach. I'm your host for Restorative Justice on the Rise dialogues and podcasts. And again, just extremely happy to be hearing from Edith and about all the activities that span truly across the European Union for this wonderful organization, which is over 2 decades in its service to community and legal system restorative justice. So just a little bit about Edith before we get into the dialogue together today. She studied at the ELTE University Budapest, where she later followed the PhD program in the field of criminology. She also has a degree in European and French law from Université Panthéon-Assas in Paris, and that's of course in France. From 2004, she worked for the Hungarian Probation Service, and from 2006, was responsible for the field of victim offender mediation. She is a trained mediator and facilitator of restorative conferences, and she almost completed a 4-year program in dance therapy. She joined the EFRJ in February of 2012 as a project officer in the project Alternative on RJ in intercultural settings, and since 2016, she is the executive director of the EFRJ. And of course, EFRJ has also been celebrating International Restorative Justice Week, and they have some extraordinary webinars even into the month of December, which are going to be posted on the RJ on the Rise website. And we've been talking about them and sending people that way for that information to the EFRJ website. EUFROUMRJ.org. That is the website. And you can see it on the slide here if you're looking at this interview via YouTube. Also, just a little bit about Restorative Justice on the Rise. We've been in motion since 2011, a relatively short period of time, it feels like, in the context of the broader movement globally. We've had the honor and pleasure of speaking with people all over the world in this field. And really the mission is to create a people's platform continuously accessible to people worldwide in order to be inspired to find connection and to find practical resources in this global field. And it certainly is growing exponentially at this time. So once again, thank you so much, Edith, for being here today, and would just love to start out by inviting you to share a bit about maybe your own story of what brought you into this field and anything else you'd like to add.
Thank you, Molly. And first of all, thank you very much for this invitation. I'm honored, and it's really a pleasure to have this dialogue with you and with your audience as well. Yeah, I think what I noticed spending quite some time already in the field of restorative justice, that almost everybody has a kind of aha moment, or a moment that they can really identify when they heard for the first time about this concept or this idea. So my story is not so spectacular, I think, but it was a gradual growing interest into the topic. I studied law, and during my law studies, yeah, it was all about this adversarial system and this win-lose situations all the time. And I think it was a radio show when I heard about mediation for the first time. So that was not restorative justice, but just mediation, the concept of mediation. And that was really eye-opening for me, that we can actually deal with conflicts or deal with issues completely differently and not in this adversarial way. And then I also did a seminar where we went to prison each week and talked to prisoners. It was a kind of seminar to learn about the work of probation officers who support release and reintegration of offenders. And I heard a lot of stories that moved me, but I also heard, or I talked to many people who considered themselves innocent. So even after many years in prison, they really didn't take any kind of responsibility for what they did. I cannot judge if they were innocent in a legal way or no, but at least their perception was that they are victims of the system. And I thought it's not really a good start to start a new life after prison and move forward. Then I also attended as a law student court trials in criminal justice. And then again, it was very absurd that accused mostly youngsters didn't say anything. They didn't speak at all. And at the end, they were sentenced. And it made no sense to me that there is no real discussion. There were even the victims there, and they didn't say anything to each other. So looking these different aspects of the criminal justice system made me think about what are we actually doing? What is this system achieving at the end? And through my interest in mediation, we also had a course in criminology on restorative justice. So it brought together the two concepts. And then, yeah, I think towards the end of my studies, I really knew that I would like to do something with this topic on this field. However, in Hungary, that time, it didn't exist at all. There were some NGOs working with practices, but it was not part of the justice system. And I also, just after my studies, I had a 2-month internship in France, where I could see for the first time in my life a real mediation in a criminal case and learn a lot about the system there. And I think I was just very lucky to be working at the probation service, which was by law charged in 2005, so just soon after my graduation, to implement victim offender mediation. And knowing my interest, my bosses trusted me as a very young, freshly graduated colleague to kind of take the lead of implementing victim offender mediation as part of the job of the probation service. Of course, I had senior colleagues and very good supervisors who helped me on the way. So it's not my personal achievement, but I think I was just very lucky to have this opportunity to build up something which is still only victim offender mediation. And then when I joined the European Forum for Restorative Justice, the whole world opened up about the different aspects of restorative justice, which is much more broader, of course, than victim offender mediation itself. So in a nutshell, I think this is my journey.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing a bit of insight into your own personal and professional journey and insights into how the system there, as well as I can assure you that very much the same here in the United States, of that feeling of division and lack of voice, certainly within the courtroom itself, as well as in the process and policy of our traditional track of justice. And so I'm hearing that, I believe, from you, that you were witnessing that and perhaps discovered that there was a way to provide voice that then also met the needs of not only the concerns of the caseworkers within the legal system, but also helped the stakeholders to be able to even maybe not be seen again by the criminal justice system, right? Meaning recidivism. And I'm just curious, would you share a little bit about about that piece? Are you seeing low recidivism rates and a lot of evidence, both quantitative as well as qualitative within the programs? And maybe we'll go back out a little bit too in a moment to where you're at as well, because I know there's many countries who have working systems at this point. So first and foremost, that was a lot. Recidivism rates, what are you seeing?
Well, I'm not a researcher myself.
Mhm.
Our organization was involved in different research projects, and one of them was about desistance, where it was not recidivism rates measured or researched most, but how restorative justice contributes to the desistance process of the offenders. And the outcomes of that research were really interesting, showing that restorative justice is a part of that, a very important part of that. But I think it's just a step on the journey. And already to be open to a restorative process or meeting with the victim, I think it requires a certain switch of mindset, a certain responsibility taking, courage, and a lot of aspects that also contribute to desistance. And what I hear, but it's more about stories I hear from people who experience restorative justice, is that the moment or the experience that somebody cares is really life-changing for many, and especially if they see that the victim cares, whom they are afraid of, or they would expect that kind of care the least from those people. And also having a voice, being seen as a human beyond the acts or beyond the crime. I think these are all important elements that contribute to desistance. And of course, there is research on recidivism, mostly in the UK. I know that most of the research shows that restorative justice contributes to a lesser reoffending rate, but also contributes to a less severe crime or less violent crime if the offender reoffends. So some kind of notion of that what I do causes harm, I think it's a lesson learned, even if the person in their life path again commits something.
That's a beautiful point. Thank you. And for I know that a lot of times it's fairly easy to slide right over to quantitative evaluation, and of course best practices are very important and measurement is important, but there's also equally, if not even more important, what you're pointing to, and that's the paradigm and the lens shift that somehow happens. I think you called it a light bulb going off for people, and especially the offender author, which author is what Dominic Barter refers to as an offender, which I appreciate the terminology very much, just for the sake of people understanding who might be listening in. But yes, the qualitative aspects of this work of humanizing and even sometimes rehumanizing, giving the transmission to another human being that they have value, that they are wanted, that they belong, and they have something to give back. We all do, and that's one of the things I'm very passionate as well about in this practice we call restorative. So I know we have a lot of ground to cover together still today in this session, and I want to just invite people to please look into the European Forum for Restorative Justice's webinars at their website page, which we will again put up on the screen and in the chat. Make sure to check out all that they're up to. They've been in motion for over 20 years. and have some extraordinary focal areas as well. I know we're going to talk about some of those in a moment. But would you like to talk a little bit more, Edith, about the forum itself and what you're seeing and what you're passionate about as far as the organization?
Yeah, with pleasure, Molly. So the European Forum for Restorative Justice is 22 years old now, so it's quite, we say that we just got adults recently. We are not those rebel teenagers anymore, probably. It's a network of professionals and organizations. We have more than 450 members at the moment, mostly from Europe, but we are also very happy and proud that we have members from all continents. And it seems that our voice is heard farther than Europe only. And I think that's really good. And we are also really happy to see a lot of other regional forums growing in Latin America. Just has been established a forum. We are in contact with the African Forum, with the Asian Pacific Forum for Restorative Justice, and of course with NACRJ in the US and other organizations. So I think it's a global movement, and we are kind of the European hub with of course a view on what happens all over the globe. We have three main strategical aims, let's say. One is to raise awareness on restorative justice. We see that even in countries where it's a well-established practice, a well-established part of the criminal justice, not only the general public, but even professionals often don't know enough or are not aware of restorative justice, or have a very narrow view of restorative justice. So one of our aim is to raise this awareness, and we use a lot of arts-based content and tools to do that. We have also a newsflash, but that's more for professionals. Feel free to sign up if you want to receive it. A blog, we have a lot of videos that are also available on our website. You can use it for trainings or whatever you need. And we do publications. But I think it's a difficult task for us to really reach out to the wider public. So I think we still struggle with that. A second big chunk of work is policy related, and we try to influence mostly international policies. We focus on the European Union and the Council of Europe, being based in Europe, but we also work with the UNODC. And here the aim is that restorative justice has enough support in international documents, international standards, support for research, for development of restorative justice, but also that restorative justice is considered in different relevant policy areas, for juvenile justice, for environmental justice, for hate crime, gender-based violence, sexual violence, and so on. So we try to bring in the perspective of restorative justice in these policy discussions. And what is also really useful, since a few years, we have our own policy network, which is composed of representatives of ministries from the EU member states and some other European countries, who are responsible for the topic of restorative justice in their ministry. And we bring them together once a year, and we also share information with them. They are also very helpful to answer questions if we do a small research or inquiry on certain aspects. So it's a very good link between the national realities or the national issues and developments that we can move into the European or more international level. And the third part of the work that we do is supporting our members and supporting practice development. And for that, we have several working groups on different topics. We can talk about that later if you want. We develop some kind of practice standards. I really think we don't want to be normative or any kind of quality controlling body, but just as a recommendation for the field with some self-assessment tools that can be used, and also different guides on certain aspects of restorative justice. We organize trainings, and of course we organize every second year a big conference, and then the other year smaller seminars, a summer school, and so on. So that's what we are busy with.
That's amazing, and I was excited to just pick up on what you just said around that, if I'm hearing you correctly, around the normalizing of any one particular, directive or best practice set, right? That I believe on your mission, it says something along those lines around that you want to provide the valuable information and suggested self-assessments for practitioners, correct? But that it's an ever-evolving structure, right? Especially,
Exactly.
okay, I just wanted to make sure I was understanding you correctly.
Exactly. We
Okay.
we don't defend any best
Yeah.
practice, or we don't want to put any branding or quality mark or anything on any kind of practice, because I think that's one of the big advantages and inspirations for me of this field, is the flexibility with which in practices, but also in the kind of legal frameworks, that it can adapt to so many different situations. Also,
because every situation is unique, just as unique as the people involved, right?
Exactly.
So, yeah, and it's quite a debate when we're trying here also to, and I'm not involved directly in any policy making, but I have been a part of, I was a director of a program here in Colorado, underneath the State Coalition for Restorative Justice. So here in the US, we have per state a lot of different coalitions that then convene together as best they can towards the national organizing bodies that we have, including the NACRJ, of course, and the good work of Mike Gilbert and Cheryl Wilson, who is the president of the board there. But I think what I'm hearing you say, and similarly what we're grappling with, is to try and leave that, try and bring to the line the best practices, information, the standards for training. Something that I really believe strongly in, and seeing what I've seen, is hands-on practice is essential, and doing mock practices with others, whether online or even better in person, really is helpful. So it's more along the lines, in my personal view, that I hope that we can do is like an apprenticeship style that we're committed to as long as we're in this field and practicing. But it's also very important to provide the other piece of that too, right? To be able to distill and provide what you've been describing, the practical tools that can help us kind of take a measure of where we're at organizationally and as practitioners, for sure. And I know here in Colorado, we're not, the coalition here is not endorsing certification of practitioners for that reason, because of the belief that this is an ever-growing practice that we have to continue to commit to again and again. There are certain standards, of course, for becoming a community member, for example, in a community group conferencing process, and certainly for being facilitators. Did you want to talk? Oh, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I think it's a very interesting topic, and I think a debate on the field since a long time, that how much
Mhm.
a facilitator or mediator should be a professional, and and I think training is really important. Knowing the skills, knowing what I do in this role is really important. But then making it a too rigid system also, I think, limits the possibilities, and what we also see in Europe, that most of the mediators are still coming from high middle class um, groups of society. So making this role more accessible for people with different backgrounds, different education. In Europe, sometimes countries really stick to a certain diploma, university degree, and then you can study to be a mediator. I think it's a very interesting debate or issue of the field, that what makes a good mediator, what makes a good facilitator, and how you ensure a certain standard of practice, which is important because for the stakeholders, that's their only experience. So if it's not good, it's also not good for the field to develop. So I think it's a very important aspect. And yeah, just to say that I think it's an issue and a consideration here in Europe too.
Yes, that's an incredible point, for sure, that this is very serious work that we're doing, to take care of people who have been harmed, to hear their voice. And that's my orange kitty wanting to say hello. Um, that all voices are heard and unmet needs are held with confidentiality, and all of the values that you're talking about that underpin how we move forward into this work, for sure. So thank you for bringing us back to that. I wanted to also just tap on your most recent conference that you hosted in Sardinia. I believe it was in June, and boy, would I have wished to have been there with you all. I know that Dominic Barter opened up the conference with some pre-sessions, I believe. And did you want to
Yes.
do a little bit of reflection on what came out of the conference, what you observed, and anything you want to share with us? Those of us who were unlucky and we're not there with you on that beautiful island.
Well, just to say that you are all warmly welcome to our next conferences. They happen every second year. And of course, this Sardinia conference was really much weighted by the field, because we had to postpone because of the pandemic. So the field had to wait 4 years to come together again. But I can say that our conferences are a very interesting mix between academia and practice. So the nature of the conference is really, I think, difficult to define, because at the end, it's also a community gathering with a lot of talks and dance and drinks and exchange beyond the official program. And we try to organize it always in a way that there is space for these interactions as well. So that's my feeling always, that people not only appreciate the content and the speakers, but also the atmosphere that is created, and that's created by the participants themselves. We just try to make the scaffolding, the space to make it happen, actually.
Mm-hmm.
For this year's conference specifically, I think we were really lucky that we had some really amazing speakers. Dominic Barter, who also gave a pre-conference training. That's a tradition because many people travel a long way to come to our conferences, and we think it's a good opportunity to offer usually 2 extra days with a more in-depth learning experience. And we were really lucky that Dominic accepted our invitation to provide this pre-conference training this year. And he was also a speaker with Mara Schiff, but we also had a very beautiful session where different groups who work in their countries on restorative justice after terrorism and violent extremist cases, which are in sometimes a more historical aspects, so things that happened 20, 30 years before. So these, sorry, it won't be a sentence anymore, but but we got in touch slowly with different groups in Europe or different professionals who were engaged in restorative processes between victims or families of victims and people who committed a very serious crime in this violent extremist or radicalized setting. And these restorative processes started, and then they got into contact with each other. And it was very interesting that people realized that they have so much in common in the way they dealt with what happened, both on the offender and the victim side, both what they experienced from the system, including the societal reaction. Of course, these are all politicized conflicts. And it was the first time that we had a public for a meeting happening between all these experiences in Spain, in Italy, in Northern Ireland, and in Israel, Palestine. And it was a very, very moving session with a lot of wisdom, I think, from every side of the story. Then we also had an amazing and touching testimony from Abby Griffith, who is a victim of a very violent sexual crime, and she really fought for her restorative meeting. That was not a given in her case, and since then she's an advocate for restorative justice. And there is even a film, it's called The Meeting. I really warmly welcome or recommend to all of you to watch it if you have the chance, which is portraying, it's not a documentary per se, but she plays herself in the film, and it's about her meeting with the offender, the expectations and what happened there. It's really well done. So we had
that perhaps on YouTube? Do you know if it's available there?
I don't think that it's openly accessible, but through the producers it's accessible, and
the
I really
meeting.
recommend it.
Okay.
Yeah, The Meeting.
Thank you. That's wonderful. Thank you.
And so we had the honor to have her there with her testimony. And what was also surprising, that we had a wonderful speech, a very inspiring speech from the Italian Minister of Justice, who really took, I think, at least 20 minutes or even more, and had a speech that received a standing ovation. That I think usually not the case with politicians or ministers opening an event or speaking at an event. She also pushed for law reform, criminal justice reform in Italy. That is actually by now, the law is adopted and there is a huge change, including restorative justice in the criminal justice system in Italy, where a few years ago it was almost non-existent. So it was very interesting to see all these different movements, the different layers and aspects of restorative justice. And I'm sorry I didn't mention all great speakers and contributions, but just as a snapshot.
Absolutely honoring everybody. I hear that though, for sure. Everyone that was there that spoke and contributed, including the people themselves that were attending, which you were sharing about a moment ago. That's very powerful when we engage together to create these spaces. And I think in my humble perception of what I've seen in this North American movement and beyond, is the more we can have those two-way explorations of what we value, so that we know more clearly how we can bring something forward that's meaningful, not just for the people who are creating it, but for everyone involved, right? And the more we do that before we convene in any way in this work, the chances are improved extremely, I believe, that people will feel they belong. And that's another
Exactly.
piece of this that, and I'm hearing that very deeply with what you've been sharing. I also want to just say before I forget, I'm also hearing evidence that I think is very important in the world of restorative justice, that people understand more and more that this is viable in even the more extreme cases. And here in the United States, we're still grappling with that at the systemic level. We grapple with it in first starting to build authentic relationship with judges and DAs and such, you know, but there's still a lot of work to be done around the, you know, the skepticism, the thought that it's only low-level crime that we can work with, you know, those kinds of things. Yeah. Do you have that as well, that struggle a bit of, and of course we want to avoid proselytizing, telling them that this is what they should be doing, you know, but we want to invite an exploration of, like, what are our values here? What do we really want out of this? And maybe have a meal together, you know?
Yeah, I really recognize what you say and the issues. Just going back for a moment for what is the role of the European Forum and the conferences and so on, I think, of course, it's an evolving field, but especially in the beginning and in some countries still, I think restorative justice professionals really work in a difficult environment. They have not so many like-minded people to talk to. They always have to fight for space, for being heard, for being accepted, with the talks with other criminal justice professionals. It's very difficult to keep up the inspiration, the drive, to believe that this can happen. So I think we also have a role in bringing together the people and provide them an environment that they can go beyond looking for just simple acceptance. And we can go beyond, you know, proving that it's an idea or a practice worth considering, and can really exchange on a deeper level. And I think that's very, very much needed. And I think I assume that also in the US, these state coalitions have an important role in creating those spaces where people can be safe and heard and also feel that they are together with like-minded people. Regarding the criminal justice system or even policymakers, of course, it requires a much longer term commitment, I think, and yes, individual talks for sure. What we also did, we invited judges and prosecutors to restorative justice meetings to experience it. Because of confidentiality, it's so difficult to really make them experience what happens there. And once you are there, you really feel if it's done well, you really feel the energy. You really feel that it's a transition happening there, or some kind of, yeah, something changes, and it's very difficult to explain. Even with the values, even with the techniques, even with testimonies. I think the best is if you let people experience it somehow or observe it.
Couldn't agree
more. Of course, not in cases in which they are involved as professionals, but
Right.
that already requires a
Right.
certain openness, I think, and it's not
Mm-hmm.
always there.
And of course, for those listening, that's always by the permission of the stakeholders.
Of course, I mean,
Yes.
that's out
Yeah.
of question. Of
Right.
course,
Right.
of
Just as
course.
a just putting that in there for those that might be like making the assumption or something about how that would work, because confidentiality and choice is always one, two of the very key underlying values of all this work. So,
Back in
yeah.
Hungary, we sometimes also invited journalists with the agreement of the parties, with, you know, respecting confidentiality and writing about the experience without any detail that would make the people recognizable. But I think it's a good way, at least, to show people what this can do, and then you don't have to explain more. So I think then they really understand. Of course, it's a slow process, and you cannot invite all judges and all criminal justice professionals to attend the meeting, but I think that's one way. Another way is really sharing stories of people who were part of a restorative encounter, and there are more and more. We will also publish soon a book of testimonies from sexual violence victims, because that's a big issue here in Europe. Some countries by law forbid restorative justice in sexual violence cases. And we really need to open up a discourse with women's organizations, feminist organizations, who are really express concerns about this, and really bring the voices of victims who actually benefited from this, and even advocate for this.
That's excellent. When will that be coming out, and how can we look into it more, that publication?
It will be available on our website, probably in March.
Okay.
It will be out for the International Women's Day.
Okay,
That's the
wonderful.
plan. That's the plan for the moment.
Okay, thank you. So while we're sharing a bit about resources, I just would like to take a moment here, Edith, if you don't mind, to remind people of these extraordinary webinars going on with EFRJ, and also a shout out to Lindsay Pointer, who is an extraordinary human being as well as a practitioner, academic. She's a beautiful blend of so many things, and creativity too, which is a theme that I've been hearing very robust coming from you, Edith, and personally, it sounds like with dance, as well as the forum is much considering the creative arts as a part of working our way through harm and conflict as well. Kind of reminds me of Theater of Witness originally out of Ireland, I believe. And they were an early on guest of ours back in probably 2012 or so. The arts have a very strong place in this work. So a cordial invitation to anyone and everyone who would like to either be at these webinars live or watch them as recordings. I believe you post them on your website after they are live. And the next one, it looks like, that's coming up is a journey around restorative cities. And that's 28th of November at 10 to 11:30 CET. For those of us in the US, I think that would mean it would be very early in the morning, the session would be. But
middle of the night, maybe.
Yeah, one way or the other.
Anybody with insomnia is really welcome.
Right. And then 7th of December, restorative justice and gender-based violence.
Yeah.
And then rounding out the series on the 8th of December, very excited about this theme, as well. Arts in Restorative Justice Practices, Theories and Training with the EFRJ Editorial Committee. Wonderful. So you have a
Thank you
packed.
for raising attention on our webinars, and everybody is warmly welcome. And yes, we will share the recordings of these webinars later on our
Wonderful.
website.
One of the areas that I'm curious to ask you about before, maybe we could talk a little bit before closing about your focus groups that you have. And I mean, you've referred to them, of course, but is the use of therapy dogs in restorative justice. And I'm wondering and curious if you are aware of, or maybe even utilizing therapy dog teams as a part of restorative justice in Europe.
Well, I'm not sure I'm I'm really experienced on this topic. I know that I think some victim support organizations presented us the idea of therapy dogs in courtrooms that give a sense of safety for the victims, and I think it was even in domestic violence cases where I think it's especially important to make the victim feel safe in any kind of setting when they meet with their aggressor. But in restorative justice, I honestly cannot say so much about therapy dogs.
That's okay. I kind of sprung that one on you. And actually, it's something that I believe really began with the devotional work of seasoned practitioner and my colleague, Patricia Latai, here in Colorado. And she was the long-term director of a program here, and brought in her love of animal therapies specific to dogs to put together a formal program for training therapy dog teams and getting them trained for restorative justice practices as well, specific to alongside and with courts, primarily with youth, but with some adults. And the results have been extraordinary, just extraordinary. So she does have a book on it called Pause for Peace. And I've seen it firsthand in circles I have supported and helped to facilitate. And it really does, even at the pre-conference level, because pre-conference and pre-work is essential, or it's not restorative. But the presence of an animal by choice, it does shift that dynamic. It seems to support deeper accountability, awareness. It helps to regulate. You know, there's so many aspects of it that are very inspiring. So
I would love to know more about this. So I'm
yeah,
happy you mentioned the book, and I'm really interested. So please share with me resources.
I definitely would love to. And again, a shout out to an honoring of Patricia Latai here in Colorado. I think she may be really quite the way shower in this particular area. I'm not aware of any other programs really as of yet. I think it's growing though, given it was seeded just recently in Colorado. Edith, I'd love to ask you a question about this thing we call restorative. And then we are rounding out our time. We have about 9 minutes left. There's a lot of conversation, I think, not just here in the US, but perhaps globally, about what restorative means, like on a personal level. Is it a way of life? Is it, you know, systemic? What does restorative mean to you? What does it, at the heart of that word, what does it mean? If you'd be willing to share.
Oh my God, if I knew exactly what I did. I think it's important
there's no wrong answers, right?
it's important to reflect on that, and as you said, I think it has again many different layers.
Yeah.
For me, it's an interpersonal restoration of something that was broken, but also a restoration, some kind of sense of justice, not in a legal understanding of justice, but more justice as a lived experience of the people. For me, it's a restoration of the self as well, especially if I think about the authors who are very often seen in the system as through what they have done only, and not in their whole life experience and in their fullness as a person. And same for the victim. The system sometimes conserves them somehow in their role as victim, not helping their healing process, so restoration of the self in that sense. And for me, it's also on the systemic level, restoration of humanity in the justice system, restoration of a whole system that humanity or modern societies built up to underline and keep the norms, but I think in its operation sometimes went beyond this goal and become very inhuman. So I think restorative justice brings a perspective that could even restore the systems that we are operating in.
Thank you. Thank you so much. What are your hopes for the future? When you can speak personally and organizationally as the director of EFRJ. Again, this is Edith Torzs, and she is the executive director of the European Forum for Restorative Justice. And yeah, so would you be willing to share a bit about your hopes for this field?
My hope for the field is that, first of all, in Europe at least, we would like to achieve a right of access to restorative justice for everybody, victims, offenders, whoever is harmed by a crime and would like to participate in a restorative process. We are really far from that. The services are not there, the legal framework is not there, the awareness is not there. So I think there is still a lot to do in that respect. I wish that all law students learn about restorative justice, and social workers and psychologists and probably even doctors and many other professions, that it's part of their university curriculum, and it's not something new they just hear and encounter at some point in their professional life. I wish that restorative justice becomes mainstream, that we don't have to fight for understanding and acceptance, but we can switch the talk on how we can do this better together. So my wish is a kind of cultural change that is inspired by restorative justice and can be inspired also about other movements as therapeutic justice or different other ways that challenge the current system of criminal justice. For the organization, I think I wish to have some more stability. Even if we are an established and I would say already old organization with a large membership, we still apply yearly for funding. We have much more plans and ideas than actual resources to make them happen. So yeah, more stability in terms of resources. That's my wish for our organization, and also more talks like this with people all over the world to inspire each other and build this whole field together.
Hmm. I hope that as well.
Maybe it's too much, but I hope for a lot.
Oh no, oh no, it's important to have these goals and vision and to begin every day doing one little thing towards it, I believe. And I believe that this field really, there's extraordinary people like yourself all over this world um, that are very committed. And I just want to thank you again for your willingness to take time, because I know that, you know, given it's been the International Observation of Restorative Justice Week, that you've been very busy, as has your entire team, and just really appreciating you and looking forward to future events that we could possibly do together online to do what you've just mentioned, which is my reason for being, raison d'être pour moi, is to help advocate and ask hard questions and to make sure that we know that we're all in this together and to inspire new people coming into this field, because every single day there's more and more people realizing that this is real. It's viable, it's practical, it's not an illusion or like everybody coming together for kumbaya, as we say here in the US. It's real.
Yes. And what I just would like to add, it's very kind of you to applaud me so much, but I think the merit is of our wonderful team of colleagues at the European Forum, and also for our super active and involved membership who are really working hours in our working groups and committees and our board, and I think we are surrounded with so many inspiring and hardworking people that this makes it happen. So it's not my personal merit, but I also would like to thank for them through this way, their commitment.
Thank you so much, Edith, and you're an inspiration as you know, someone who has been trained within as an attorney. I believe you have your degree in that area, and all over the world, I have noticed a growing field of attorneys, and some in Europe, of course, that I'm personal colleagues with that are also restorative justice advocates. And it's so good to see more and more people from within the system doing that work for advocating and just, you know, um, illuminating the process itself as well as the evidence, which is completely extraordinary and undismissible. If that's not proper grammar, but you know what I mean. So I just want to thank you again. We're at the top of the hour here and want to respect your time. I believe you're in Leuven. Is that correct?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
In Belgium. Yeah.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you so much for spending the late afternoon, almost to the dinner hour, perhaps, for you there. And just want to thank again the EFRJ as a whole for all that you're doing in Europe, and can't wait to hear more about the future, and encouraging people to check out their website, which is EUFORUMRJ.org. And don't forget the next webinar that they have coming up here is called A Journey Around Restorative Cities. And that's to be held on the 28th of November, just this next week, from 10 to 11:30 CET. I'm Molly Rowan Leach. I am founder and host of the podcast section of Restorative Justice on the Rise. We also offer virtual events of all kinds and have been going since 2011. And it's an honor to have hosted this session. To those of you who are curious about where to find us online, restorativejusticesontherise.org. You can also go to our podcast, which is at iTunes. And thank you for leaving us a review. We have close to 5-star reviews, so far. So hopefully that's a good indicator that these podcasts are inspiring people. Thank you again for your participation, and we'll see you next time. And thank you to Edith Torzs of the European Forum for Restorative Justice.
Thank you, Molly. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much.